Now he knows many of the cruel realities facing the neighborhoods he represents, and he knows it's high time those realities were transformed. It's a tall order that Mark Treyger faces every day representing Southern Brooklyn, where the many challenges seem to intersect. It's an area still struggling to rebuild after Superstorm Sandy, an area that has decaying schools built during the New Deal, an area that's all but forgotten by public transit. But it's not all bad. Joining us to talk about the way forward is New York City Councilmember Mark Treyger. Welcome back to BK Live.
Thanks so much for having me.
So we laid out just a few of those challenges from the top, but I'm going to ask you to counter that just in short answer form. You're also proud to represent your district as well. So what made you smile this morning thinking about being the city council member from Gravesend and Coney Island?
To me, there's no other place other than Southern Brooklyn, and no other place like Coney Island. You know, today actually is the 90th birthday of the cyclone.
We mentioned that at the top of the show.
So we have a lot of history there, a lot to be proud of. Mm-hmm. But as you mentioned, there's still a lot of work to do. We are recovering from the worst storm in our history. We've made some progress, but there's more work to do. And even before Sandy, we've had our fair share of challenges, such as transportation, managing the growth and the density of our neighborhoods, right. Making sure our schools get the proper resources. Again, progress has been made, but again, more work to do.
So you had transit and schools in there, so I'm going to start with transit.
Yes.
We know that it's not the best served area of the city,
No.
but one of the possible solutions might be incorporating ferry service down to the southern tip of Brooklyn as well?
You don't say. Yes, I just want to paint the picture for you. If a resident from the west end of Coney Island, mm-hmm. if you live by West 33rd Street in Coney Island on Surf Avenue or Mermaid, you're waiting for a bus to take you to Stillwell Avenue so you can connect to a train to take you to Manhattan.
That's right.
That bus ride from West 33rd to Stillwell will probably take about a half hour, maybe possibly more. Mm-hmm. So then you wait for the train to get to Manhattan, and that's another possibly an hour ride. So when I tell people it takes my residents between an hour and a half to 2 hours to get to Manhattan, I'm not exaggerating. That's the commute.
Yeah.
Versus some other parts of Brooklyn, mm-hmm. where it's about 15, 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And again, I'm not looking to take away from any other neighborhood, no. But my residents wait a long time to get to school, to get to work, to get to doctor's appointments. And so we were very disappointed that we were left out of the initial ferry system. However, I am being told that we're under serious consideration for the next expansion. And believe me, I will be on top of that and holding our leaders accountable.
Well, it seems like a natural fit just to
yes.
this guy, so I don't know. So we hit transportation a little. Let's talk about schools. You are a former teacher.
Proud former teacher, yes.
And you don't have a say in whether mayoral control happens, as you are in our city council and not in a state representative. But if you had your druthers, do you believe that this system, mayoral control, is the best system that we have versus the local school councils?
I believe that mayoral control is important in the sense of accountability. Mm-hmm. I think that under the old system, accountability was so spread out in the sense where you weren't sure who was in charge at what time. Right. I would also add that we need to make sure that the person who is accountable and responsible for our system is actually responding to the needs of our school communities. So yes, I do support mayoral control. I would support some tweaks to it.
Yeah. Like what?
For example, I would like the city council to have advise and consent power over the next school's chancellor.
So you want mayoral control, but with the caveat that the city, our representatives who we elect, should have a say as well, a louder voice.
Yeah, I would tweak the term to city control or municipal control,
Gotcha.
Where the mayor still should select the chancellor of our school system, but he should work through the city council so we have a chance to vet and ask questions of the appointee.
To avoid a Kathy Black situation.
That's exactly what I was going to say,
yeah.
To avoid a Kathy Black situation. That was a very demoralizing time in our school system. I was actually taking classes to be a principal mm-hmm. when she was appointed chancellor, and I'm sitting in Brooklyn College in the evening time after teaching 5 classes yeah. that day, tired but still going to school to get my license. and the news breaks that she's the next chancellor, never spent a day in the classroom. And imagine if the council had some power over that decision. So again, I do believe that the mayor should be held responsible and should be given that authority, but with some checks and balance in the system as well. But right now, that is in the hands of Albany, and I am disappointed that some of our Senate leaders up in Albany are trying to hold the city kids hostage because of other types of politics. This is the largest school system in New York State. Their main concern should be funding the largest school system in New York State, which historically has been shortchanged, but that has not been a part of the discussions up to this point.
So just to mind this a little bit, because I don't often get to sit down with teachers turned city council members,
Right.
From both of your vantages, is there a way that we money ourselves out of the problems with the schools, or do you think there are other fundamental shortfalls that can be made up with that may not just be spending measures, but not to shortchange them as well?
Right. Well, we get funding from a variety of streams. We get funding from the federal government, which is concerning these days as well. We get funding from the state. We get funding from the city. So it's a combination of different funds. I do believe that funds by themselves are not the cure-all to all of our problems, but they're required. We need them, particularly kids who are most vulnerable, kids with special needs. They need extra support and resources. But I was a big advocate for also reforming the way we measure progress in our schools. I had students that were amazing kids that were not just talented in reading and writing, but also had talents in culinary skills, engineering skills. Right. We never really cultivated that because the system is so designed towards testing, right. and we lost out on all those opportunities. So I'd like to find ways to measure those talents as well and make them count, as opposed to just testing them over and over again.
Okay, so let's transition from the schools to larger community concern. We know that President Trump is toying around with the idea of changing the federal funding in public housing, and that we might see some residents who have their rent increased by 5%, from about 30% to 35% of their income. And that could be very significant in your district. So what does that 35% number represent in real world terms versus 30% of income spent on housing?
It's devastating. We're in crisis, and I have news for people. The rents are already increasing, and that's without any of these proposed cuts even happening. I had a meeting recently in one of my developments to discuss a Sandy recovery update, and some residents brought to my attention that they've already received
got notices
of some increases. And these are working folks, these are working people, these are our transit workers, these are our nurses, these are the people that make our city run every single day. We can't afford to price them out. We have an obligation to help the people that make New York run, to help the people that really help build New York, they are our community. And so this is devastating. Right now, we need to do everything possible to work with our federal delegation, our congress members, our senators, to help support them any way we can to make sure that funding is not cut, but also to have discussions in the state and the city about, how do we deal with, if this comes to fruition, how do we respond to this? To me, housing is a lot more important than maybe some pet projects that some of us might have in government. We have to make sure that our housing buildings have adequate heat, hot water, the roofs are not leaking, the mold is being removed, that people can live in peaceful, safe apartments. So this is a very, very serious, real discussion that we need to be having at the local, state, and federal level.
So you hit on housing there, which is tremendously important. Since the storm, we've had the opportunity to spend a lot of time in Seagate profiling folks and sharing their stories of recovery and resiliency. But there's also this larger question of, should we be encouraging people to stay in places like Seagate? Yeah. Is there any sort of movement afoot in the city council or any of the governing bodies to do buyouts, or say, all right, you know what, we might just have to give this one back to the sea? Like, what is the position on Seagate now?
So there's multiple ways to answer that question. First of all, you can't blame the people that did not plan our communities this way.
Some 800 homeowners affected.
Correct. And even from Seagate, and also there's some areas in Staten Island that face a similar dynamic, and Queens as well, and Broad Channel. You can't blame them. You know, they didn't plan this out. You know, it's true that we went beyond Mother Nature's borders. Developers historically in the city built beyond where Mother Nature left her land. Mother Nature reminds us where she left her land every time a storm comes. So that's not fair to them. However, Sandy exposed just how vulnerable some of these homes are, and Build It Back, for example, and the state's New York Rising program focused on certain areas in New York City to buy people out and to acquire their property, but they didn't focus everywhere. And that recently became a big issue with Build It Back because some folks, I think, were willing to have that discussion.
What percentage of the people who you think would have said, yeah, give me the buyout, I've been licked, I'm going to go?
I think a good number of people from my community, even beyond, even into maybe Manhattan Beach, Sheepshead Bay, would have had a discussion to say, if this is an option, what is the buyout amount?
Gotcha.
They focused on Oakwood, Staten Island. They focused in certain parts of Broad Channel and Queens. They didn't publicize that so much in southern Brooklyn. They gave people the option to get a reimbursement, a repair, elevation, or rebuild if they met the qualifications.
Yeah.
But they didn't publicize that they could acquire the property and do a buyout. And now they are, but we're so late in the game, and many people have dropped out of the program, which is a real problem.
Okay, on the same theme, just one more minute on this resiliency. I was sharing with you earlier, I had some friends visiting from Amsterdam who were just telling me backwards and forwards all the things that town, which is underwater, is doing to be ready. But they were laughing at us. They're saying, why haven't you guys gotten it together? You saw what happened, it's gonna happen again. So why are we dragging our feet with resiliency? The world is laughing at us, knowing what happened, and we should be scared.
And I've said this to people, I'll share with all your viewers. If it's not a hurricane or a physical storm, it will be a financial storm. FEMA is in the process of redrawing our flood maps in New York City.
That's right.
Thousands and thousands of more New Yorkers will be required to purchase flood insurance. If we don't do anything to mitigate that, people will be priced out of their homes. Those costs will be very, very expensive. And as it is, people live check to check, and they're one emergency away from losing everything. So we have an obligation, yes, to protect life and property, but also the affordability of our city. And I share this because if you invest in resiliency work and meet FEMA standards to mitigate some flooding, they can reduce your flood insurance rates. And that's what's happening in Staten Island, for example, where they have a big Army Corps project. The Army Corps project, they're trying to make sure it meets FEMA standards. About $500 million worth of work happening there, which was years in the making, about 20 years or so. And that will hopefully offset costs for them. In southern Brooklyn, when I took office, I learned that we were left out of a study by the Army Corps until we began to advocate and say, why were we left out? So they added us. But we're just at the study phase right now. But I've been meeting with our federal partners, making sure that funding will be in place. Because again, yes, we have to protect life and property, but affordability is on my mind as well.
Okay, so before you get out of here, on to something that may be a little happier. We've got Prospect Park, Eastern Parkway, Ocean Parkway, all three designated scenic landmarks. But for some reason, 94 years later, Coney Island has not risen to that level. What's up with that?
You know, almost every week I got an email from the New York City's film media office that some television crew wants to film a scene on the boardwalk.
Why wouldn't they?
And so it's obvious to me that, and to many of us, that the boardwalk has an international audience and it has recognized through many countries around the world as a boardwalk. And so we had 51 of the city council members, all of us, vote as in a resolution to landmark the boardwalk. We've been supported by the comptroller, Scott Stringer, public advocate Tish James, borough president Eric Adams, numerous officials, friends from around this country have been emailing me saying, how is it not a boardwalk already? The only person who so far we have not convinced is Mayor de Blasio.
Okay, last minute before we go here. That's maybe a difference of opinion. I wanted to ask you about another difference of opinion. Your district went pretty largely in some pockets for Donald Trump. How do you balance those maybe conservative voters and principles with your progressive politics in delivering for everyone in the district?
Well, there are big pockets in my district of folks from the former Soviet Union. Some of them are Holocaust survivors, World War II veterans, senior citizens.
In your own family, even.
I am a grandson of Holocaust survivors and World War II veterans. And many of them watch Russian television networks, some of them who are still controlled by Moscow. And unfortunately, we can't compete with that type of, I would say, propaganda that they're exposed to on a daily basis. Some of them are single-issue voters, such as the issue of Israel, such as the issue of making sure that their needs are, the issues of the Jewish communities being addressed. And for example, one of the networks kept replaying a video of Hillary Clinton hugging the late Yasser Arafat's wife. And so as I'm trying to make sure that housing for our seniors is being addressed and transportation and their health care, this is what's being shown on television almost every day. We have work to do, and I will meet person to person, floor to floor, block to block, door to door. I'll keep doing that. But it's hard to compete sometimes against large television networks.
Yeah, we're paying a lot of attention to that lately. Huh?
Yes, correct.
Mark Treyger, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much as well. Thank you.
All right.